from Ed. He's a very good presenter. From our point of view, he's the thought leader in the market that's been around for a long time. Make sure to write down some questions. If he has some questions, he's the guy that can answer.
Thank you for that setup. Appreciate it. As Henrik said, Ed Maddock, Vice President Development for iGrafx. I want to thank Mark and Henrik for inviting us and allowing us to do a presentation, especially right before you all get a chance to go to the Charleston Food and Wine Festival. Nice that we're right at the tail end of the event here. I know I'll be there. So, I guess one of the things that it's important to understand is, obviously we're a vendor up here and we're the only one that has a chance to present. And one of the things that I want to make clear is that I'm not going to sit here and try to sell you iGrafx. I'm going to try to explain to you what we've done with the product in support of lead framework. I'm going to go through some specifics in terms of extended process modeling using the lead concepts, which we have added to the product over the last couple of years. So that's the key element of the presentation. Obviously, if you have questions, feel free to throw them our way. That's the presentation that I'm going to go through. And you've heard a lot about different tools already here this week, whether it's IBM, or Sparks, or Eris. Obviously, we're another one of those tools in the space, and I'm not going to make any statements about any of those other products, as much as I might. Okay, so what's on the agenda for today? Well, it's pretty high. Okay. I just want to run through, at least my perspective, on the history of process modeling and the results we've run into so far. Can everybody hear me okay back there? I got the right distance? Okay. And one of the questions that often gets answered is whether process modeling can be the focal point of business innovation and transformation. This is basically the challenge that's put forth with regards to the lead framework and leading practice. We'll talk about best practices in process modeling, kind of where we are. We'll talk about the process modeling practitioners that exist out there, and in particular with regards to BPMN, what's being served currently and what's not being served, and then how to go about enhancing the BPMN standard, or essentially extending it to solve some of these problems. And then I'm going to run through a quick example of the product running on the PowerPoint platform to at least describe how you walk through an example and apply this. So that's what we're going to go through today. So in regards to the history, there's been several, obviously many initiatives over many years with regards to doing process modeling, and there have been successes. The easiest point of entry for process improvement is a process modeling tool. They're easily accessible. You've all used them at some point in time. There are proven methodologies out there. We've talked about Lean and Six Sigma in the past, and they're still very active. And there's notational standards, whether it's something from IDEF, if you go back that far, or value stream mapping, or obviously BPMN. They're all still available. Oh, look, there's been an update to my slide. Did Mark get in there? Low-hanging fruits, depending on where you come from. That's basically one of the claims to fame for these process modeling solutions, is there is low-hanging fruit you can get to from just doing process modeling without anything at a higher level within your enterprise. But there have been pain points associated with it. One of the key ones that we've seen is the activity that's done within the organization is often not aligned with the strategies, goals, and objectives of the organization. Obviously, a key element of what leading practice brings to the table. The methodologies themselves consume resources. If you've been involved in organizations that have applied a full-scale Six Sigma project or other types of methodologies, there's a lot of resources that are dedicated to that. That's all positive. There's improvements, but how do you know that they're tied to the corporate goals? There's minimal use of the model components that are developed through these initiatives, and oftentimes, therefore, multiple or duplicate services are created. So there's localized improvements, but rarely do you reach the level of business transformation. So what's been done to try to
or what are the pain points associated with this, and what have people done to their solutions? Well, we definitely view BPMN 2.0 as a critical enhancement in terms of being able to capture this additional information. So that's certainly been an evolution. Many products have essentially evolved there, some exclusively. So some products, that's all they actually notate. Through Mark beating them over the head, many vendors have actually added repository solutions, whether that be data objects, enterprise objects, or even just storage mechanisms for the documentation associated with it. Well, therefore, it enables content management and collaboration and support for shared enterprise objects. So that's a key evolution of these products. Now, there's obviously been a much greater number of successful implementations, but there's still some limits. We're going to talk about that. So many of the tools still can't quite do the job. The key element is traceability back to the goals and objectives of the organization. Oftentimes, there's limited analysis and monitoring capabilities. And one of the things that is key is you still are missing certain enterprise object and relationship pieces. We've heard a lot about enterprise architecture here this week. That's one of the key elements that is still missing for many of the solutions. Missing concepts in the standard notations reduces the user community. So typically, standard BPMN 2.0 addresses certain community members, but others are not addressed. Obviously, lean has recognized the importance of the process world, therefore it's a key decomposition object, frameworks associated with it. And of course, that's what oftentimes these process modeling tools are built to address. But the problem is, the processes in their interaction with all the other elements of the organization, and therefore all the different constituencies within an organization, cannot serve all of them without having these kinds of relationships. So this is key to move forward. So, best practice approach. Can process modeling be the focal point? Yes, it can. What should you look for? Well, one of the key elements is you have to support these enterprise architecture concepts. If it's not part of the solution, then it's hard for you to be able to deliver on the functionality that you need to get to the point of business transformation. The notation needs to be understood by all levels within an organization. It needs to be concise at the business level, so it can be readable and understood by a wide variety of people. But it also needs to be detailed at the implementation level. You have to have the flexibility of creating the level of content that you need. It needs task types, in the sense of BPMN, rule modeling, it needs report definition, and it also needs the critical element that we've talked about, business information and data objects. What else? Obviously, we talked about the enterprise model objects and relationships. The purpose is to be able to manage and understand gaps and impacts within your organization through the model. We believe it must also support KPIs and PPIs, process performance indicators, in the context of the process models. That's where you want to visualize information and roll that information up. It must have, we believe, what-if analysis. You need the front-end element to analyze the effect of change before you actually deploy it. And it must have process performance monitoring capability to validate at the end you got the effect you were hoping for. So, where are we today? We have BPMN 2.0. It's a great standard to get started from. It has addressed many of the things that I've just talked about in terms of standard and concise visual understanding of these models. There's simple standard objects, and one of the reasons that it has been so successful and been driven so much is because it looks very much like the standard flowcharts of old. It has that same sense to it. And so people can adopt and recognize the information. They only have to evolve a certain amount of understanding to accept it. It's effectively there for all user personas, so it's not just one classification. And there's a tremendous community out there that's driving not only usage, but content and various elements of style. It can add varying levels of detail, so from concept of hierarchy to advanced flow behaviors, task types, data objects. So a wide variety of things are actually included in there based on the design that's happened from many constituencies that developed the standard. It also has links to implementation, and this is one of the key driving factors when it was developed in the first place, is the links to the implementation and execution models. The semantics to support process model execution and one for us is the link to strategies. It doesn't have anything embedded in it to allow you to understand that linkage. You also want to be able to define relationships between business competencies and processes and report on those things. There's no concept of that. Measurements, rule sets, the wide range of things, and the wide range of personas that go unserved by BPMN 2.0 out of the box, even though it's a great standard. So, can BPMN 2.0 address all of these model constituencies? Well, there's a few issues, but they can be solved. So the key one here is the service distinction. So those of you who know BPMN know that there's a concept of a task type, which is either manual or unautomated service. The term service, of course, comes from the SOA use of the term in terms of a web service. And of course, the distinction that Lead likes to make is the fact that services in themselves are completely different and have nothing to do with whether they're automated or not. They can be either. The same with tasks. They can be automated or manual. That's a key distinction. The idea of extending business rules modeling and reporting to be able to have the points of reporting directly in the process maps. Very important. And then to extend the data object concept to add the concept of business and information objects. And the example I'll have when I run through the application, we'll talk about information flow and actually usages for optimizing the process, managing the information flow. And support for strategy, business competency, and KPIs linked to the activities. Now, the good news, the developers of BPMN 2.0, in their infinite wisdom, understood that it was going to be important to be able to extend BPMN. So, in fact, the concept of extension to BPMN 2.0 is reasonable. And so, therefore, in conjunction with leading practice folks, iGrafx has developed some extensions and added them as part of our previous release. Key ones were extending the BPMN task types. They have both a manual task and an automated task. So that used to be a web service or an automated service, and now that's been changed to mean automated task. And then we've added 2 new ones, the manual service and the automated service. So now you have the distinction between these 2. Thank you. Thank Mark, actually. One of the times he was beating me over the head was over that particular conversation. Other things that we added in support of Leading Framework is the reporting task type and several of the rule modeling elements to add the ability to do rule modeling and to establish reporting points, points for PPI. The idea here is that you go through and capture your strategy, determine your competency gaps, identify your opportunities for innovation transformation, and prioritize the items to change. And then use the process models to understand and analyze the impact by running what-if scenarios, and then deploy it and monitor it. All right, to start with, at the top level, the strategy map. We've talked about maps, matrices, and models. Let's just look at essentially an example. This may be a little hard for you to read, but basically this is an example model with some strategies on the left, SBOs, CSFs, and KPIs. So these are captured in the model and establish responsibility or ownership for each of these. One of the important elements of being able to capture this information is to be able to run gap analysis on the information in the model. It's actually in your enterprise structure. So in this case, which KPIs have no responsibility? Obviously, it's difficult to achieve them if no one's actually thinking about them. Second, taking the business competencies that have been captured and discussed here and linking them to the KPIs as well. Similar gap analysis. So here we've added the line of business and the competency elements, and now map those into the model, and then run gap analysis there. So which KPIs can't be fulfilled because there was no competency in the organization to deliver on that. Standard reporting. And now the idea of the business model, to be able to identify the opportunities based on the information in the strategy map. Actually, this will link it to the activities. So essentially tying the KPIs and linking them to the activities that are there, find out where the activity gaps are. Same concept as you map out the rest of the strategy elements, all the way down to the individual activities. Map them themselves and create that relationship, and then do a gap analysis. Which KPIs can be measured by a process? So if in fact you're not able to determine whether your KPI is achievable or not because there's no process associated with it. So all elements of trying to build up the model with the tool, with the concepts that will now be driven into the process model components. So here's your standard business model. You've seen several of them. You want to be able to identify and prioritize the opportunities. Gary's presentation was tremendous in terms of identifying how you go about doing this. This is just a capture of the competencies that are actually there, and then highlighting one particular area, in this case for operational optimization. This is an insurance company example. I think that's property casualty quotations. All right, so now we're going to use the notation with the information we've captured in the strategy and the model, and then run some gap analysis on that as well, and then run what-if simulation. Okay, here's an example of kind of an unmonitored standard BPMN 2.0 model. Now, there's elements of things that are simply missing, and one of the first elements is being able to add these other types of tasks to the model to help articulate what is actually happening. The examples we're talking about include the idea of extended task types. You see a menu item down below it. You have the extended lead practice ones. It includes the manual services and the automated services. There's examples of manual services, some automated services, all of those identified by the icons in the map. And once you've got that identified, now you're able to run reporting to find out, for example, an inventory or cross-reference of where services are used within processes. Other types of analysis can be done as well once these have been identified and tied into the model. In this case, business rules. And for those of you that use BPMN, you know that before each gateway, decision gateway, you typically put a business rule or some kind of decision logic prior to that particular point. Standard or best practice modeling in BPMN is not to put that logic on the gateway, to put it prior to that, which fits in very well for having a business rule just prior to a gateway. One of the nice things about the extensions is you can actually now break this down in the case of a rule flow into the constituent pieces that drive that decision. So this is one of the nice elements of leading practice extensions to BPMN. So this is essentially a subflow, in this case fraud risk assessment, with the different steps that go into that to determine whether in fact it's acceptable risk to move forward. And now we map into the model, we take that object and map it to the business rule associated with it. And once we have that and the risks that's associated with that business rule, now we can create reports in the enterprise modeling system to analyze the risks and the business rules across that section of activities and processes. Now, one of the most important elements of this, and one of the things we'll see in the example, is the ability to add business and information objects in addition to the data objects for a map. And so as you see up in the upper right, you see the choices for the different kinds of shapes that you can actually use as artifacts. Analogous to data objects in BPMN, but extendability, extensions to that particular concept. And for those of you interested, in fact, this still does make it out of the XML stream, of course, as an extension to the standard BPMN. In this case, it can be modeled and mapped as work product flow between particular processes or activities. And within that, you can do reporting in the enterprise modeling system to track business object flow and information object flow. Okay. Now, one of the most important elements that we have found associated with these extensions is the ability to articulate your maps and models with points of measurement, in particular for PPIs, but KPIs and PPIs collaborated together. And so essentially, you can look at this and find out where you need to be taking measurements and therefore monitoring the process to determine if you're achieving the goals that you've got. Okay, so we're going to go through an application. Essentially, create a scenario, which is that we need to do some cost cutting. We have some KPIs and PPIs that are driving those cost cutting ideas. And we wanted to identify some proposed changes. And the one that's been identified is driven by the fact that since this visual model can be understood by a wider variety of constituencies, there's different opportunities for optimization that will actually come to light. And we're going to evaluate the effect on the PPIs using what-if analysis, and then we're going to monitor going forward. So simulation, obviously I mentioned earlier, is a key element of this. It does resource contention, cost, and cycle time analysis. So you can essentially determine where the current process is running. So here's an example. In this particular case, we're looking at trying to reduce the average settlement cost, the amount of settlement paid per claim submitted to the insurance company. But there's two other important PPIs that we're trying to monitor at the same time. One of them might be the percentage of claims rejected, which might be a reflection of customer loyalty, and also the number of resubmits as a percentage of claims. So if a claim is rejected, you may turn around and resubmit it for reevaluation. So both of those are important PPIs to evaluate in the context of what we're looking at, which is a cost reduction strategy. So here's our as-is in terms of the current model. So going back to the map, we see this information object, the risk report, which has been generated by the perform risk assessment activity. Now, the standard process flow essentially drives information and data down into the assess claim step. But what's interesting is there's no information flow of that risk report down into that assess claim activity. Now, an information modeler or analyst or expert will see this and say, this looks like an opportunity. Goes and talks to the people in the assess claim area and determines that, wow, if we had that information ahead of time, it would allow us to scrutinize the claims as they come through here much more thoroughly, and therefore give us a better chance of rejecting basically lower level claims that we should be ignoring. And so essentially, the model is modified by just mapping additional information flow. As part of it, of course, it changes the dynamics of the gateway in front of it in terms of the percentage of change so that we can run an additional simulation and compare the results for the what-if analysis. So in this case, we see that our average claim cost has gone down as we had hoped. We have seen the number of claims rejected go up. That's expected because of the change we made. And the number of resubmission of claims, as simulated, appears to be well within our range of reasonability. So we reach the point where we say, okay, we've got our model of understanding in place. Now we're going to apply the actual change that we're talking about. And now it's time to view this in a real-time environment. So we talked about cockpits, dashboards, and scorecards. In the case of a cockpit, looking at the actual PPIs within the model and see what the effect of those is historically. So using our performance management system that ties the information from the model that's been generated directly into the performance system, you can actually look over time. We see where the change was actually made, and we saw the cost numbers have gone down. We can establish reasonable limits at the high end and low end in terms of what expectations are. We can change them over time so we can determine still within scope. And we also see the increase in rejected claims, and we also see resubmission counts in a range. Both of these, from a standpoint of the cockpit, we look at and we say this is reasonable. So now the question is, time marches on over a period of time. And what you like to be able to do is make sure that you've got an understanding and handle on the issues that come up. So at a higher level, you have the concept of the scorecard. The scorecard can actually give you indications of things underneath it at a varying level of priority for you to see, I need to drill down to be able to determine the root cause of this problem. So we drill down and we see that in fact the number of resubmits has gone up for some particular reason. What we can determine now is an ownership because we've established that to that particular PPI, and we can determine an action plan to try to address it. So that's the key element of tying these measurement points into the model and tying it back up into a performance management system. So, in summary, extended process modeling. This means business process flows with a common visual language. That's the key element of this, is that it's easier to understand than many other mechanisms for designing these processes. BPMN 2.0 has been key to that, adoption. Supporting for the EAD objects that are unreachable by current BPMN standards, BPMN 2.0 standards, and gap and impact reports, simulation analysis to be able to look and manage forward rather than rearview mirror, and then scorecards, dashboards, and cockpits to maintain control. Captured under the concept of process modeling, much more extensive than typically thought of just a standard modeling or mapping tool. As the focus of business transformation, so essentially prioritizing opportunities and measuring that information, applying the business competencies to achieve the KPI objectives, and then essentially apply positive change, and then continue to monitor and evolve the strategies, goals, and objectives, and evolve the processes as you move forward. So that's it. Questions?
In mapping the costs, do you have a way to notate the cost centers in an organization?
That can be done with swim lanes and answer pools typically.
Okay.
Of course, that ties into the simulation environment because it's using those resources that you've assigned to that particular organizational structure to determine resource loading and effect. Other questions?
Can you build your own stencils?
You can do that, yeah, sure. You can extend the standard product to be able to have your own palette of information. I mean, obviously, what we have with BPMN is a fairly standard set of things that we try to use, but use a completely extendable mechanism to be able to create things that are useful. I think in terms of interchange, there are tools out there that use different types of shapes, and so oftentimes there's a desire to have it look the same way as a tool, and so having those kinds of shapes available is practice, obviously.
What's the main thing that differentiates this tool from others?
See, I wasn't going to talk about differentiation. Remember I said that?
Here with
well, you know, I think the key thing that we believe is the importance of bringing a wider constituency of people into the process. And I know we've talked a lot about enterprise architecture and the important value process of enterprise architects. But there's also these constituencies of people that are the process experts that are across the entire organization. And one of the standard things that I typically hear, I'm not making any claims about any particular products, is that some of them are more difficult to adopt in different levels of the organization. There are different methodologies that are applied to solve some of those problems. But one of our distinguishing characteristics is to at least capture the base information to be done at a wide range within the organization and then brought up into the higher level enterprise and then, as I said, analyzed and monitored. So that's probably why I'm categorizing it. Yes?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could address the importance of a repository and what value that adds when we have a collection of process.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Probably several things that I would say about that, and I think one of the things that is important, most important, is the fact that you have an object repository, making a distinction between an object repository and, say, a document repository. In fact, the product we have does both of those particular features that throw one in, right? But it is the case that without those objects, the enterprise objects to link into your models, into your process models, then you're not gaining the benefits of all the reporting that I was trying to show. So that is a key value proposition, is to be able to look at the relationships between these objects as represented in the process maps, garner and gather information. So the repository is central for that. It's also a key collaborative environment, so that essentially if you're checking information in, you have a web interface that can access all that information. That is central for being able to make sure that this information is accessed by the entire organization. Now, one thing I will say is that there are still cases where people like to be able to take products that are not connected to the repository and still create data and then have that be tied into the repository at a later date. That can be something as simple as Visio models that you want to import. So it is actually important, believe it or not, to have a mechanism by which you can work offline from the repository. So that's another key element that we have found in most of the usage scenarios. People want both. So having the ability to have that connection and being able to create it to existing models is a key element. Yes?
That one view that you showed where you kind of decomposed in the node and it showed a risk factor.
Yes.
I like that because I guess when I looked at what the leading's doing with the with security, it seems like the security goes into the composition, but not necessarily outside the decomposition. So that composition could be part of that risk factor. So, I mean, is there other applications other than security where that would be more useful?
Well, you know, generally, from a BPMN perspective, having the ability to decompose shapes into either embedded subprocesses or even callable processes is an important element from the extensibility perspective and also the ability to reach a wider audience. In this case, it's using a very specific example to say, okay, here's a business rule, but there's more to it than just that. And either you define it somewhere else and then link to it, or if the same person that's doing the model knows what those steps are, wouldn't it be nice if I can just put it right in the model and leverage it from there? And so that's the idea between that. There are others like that that you can use to break them down. Yes?
So the value at the end of this is to obviously automate it. How do you align with the people side,
Mhm.
some of the process execution engines and their concepts of services.
Right. Well, first, there might be some that argue with you on that particular point, but I won't go there because, in fact, there are many people who want to be able to link direct execution. BPMN, by its very nature, originally built at least, had a semantic for mapping directly to BPEL. We view the market as moving pretty significantly from that. In fact, BPMN 2.0 XML is in fact the way most people are moving to. So most of the interchanges that we work with have been either through BPMN 2.0 XML or, believe it or not, XPDL 2.0, 2.1, and 2.2. And there are many cases where there have been custom XML interchanges where we've done XSLT transformation from our XML to these other forms. So the semantic is there to be able to represent whatever interchange format you really need to assume into the BPM system that you're trying to target. So it is in fact available. It's just a question of which standard is the best one to use once you're importing. Good question, thank you. Yes?
So are the lead objects, that object hierarchy in the meta model available as a plugin or accelerator for iGrafx? Is that available today?
It is available today. What I would say is that it's an evolving portion of the product. So we are mapping elements of lead into elements that we have in our meta model. So there is that transformation, a lot of discussion about naming conventions and things like that. There may be issues that you face initially, but that's an evolving element of it. So we can support all of them, but it's not through a more enterprise architecture focused, build a meta model from scratch into this particular structure. So that's the different approach that you see from a lot of the other conversations that we've had so far this week.
And if I can also,
Accelerator for BPQC.
if I can add something to it, as time is running out, if I can add something to it, it depends on the purpose that you want to have with it. If you want it for full enterprise architecture, obviously you wouldn't really use a BPM tool. It's an extended BPM tool. You can do all the aspects of business architecture with it. And I mean all the aspects. From business competencies to business models, to strategy, to critical success factors, to KPIs, to PPIs, to SPIs, to rules, to, I have less voice, to rules, to flow rules. And I mean from the aspects from manual service to automated service, it touches all aspects of the business architecture. In this case, I mean, what more can you expect from a business layer tool? In addition to that, it can actually specify automated tasks. And no, not like other BPM 2.0 vendors who have automated services. They don't have automated tasks. It can specify what is an automated service and what is an automated task, which is very important for application modeling. We have enough architects here who will say, yes, exactly, that's why we've never been able to use independent of BPMMS execution. We've never been able to use it the way we really need to. So we have the capabilities, but there is missing aspects. So I just have to add, while we are as well coming to the end, what is it you do? Can you do platform modeling with it? Infrastructure modeling? No. But I would highly doubt that you would get a BPM tool to do that kind of modeling.
Kind of architecture.
So it doesn't take away the need for you to use a tool like Sparks or something else if you do EA. You can't get away from that, which we already talked in the last session with Neil, heard him. But this is a tool that literally takes it. Good. In addition to that, I want to take, we will never have, I mean, by the way, thank you, Ed. You're doing a great job. We are so excited about iGrafx. They have capabilities. They literally the ability how to work with processes, service flows, and data flow in a quite different level that the market has been looking for many, many years. So we're very excited about it.
Good job.
Engineering.
So now Mark will extend on that. Hey, thank you. We got the sales version. I really love working with Ed and his team on this. I would like to extend a little bit what I believe that really differentiates it. We have had problems in going to organizations that actually have processes. Now you have KPIs, but the most tools, even though they are process tools, couldn't specify a PPI. They couldn't specify a process measurement. I mean, I know, if you think about it, you would say, you gotta be kidding me. No. They could attach a KPI and it was only attached. It was not like a real object. It's not like Professor Simon talked about object-to-object relationships, that now it has a meaning. It's just like, even all the ones that exist that are real objects within the process, if they added a KPI, it was just kind of like an information saying, here's a KPI. For those of you who want to see it, we have some sessions on our webpage showing this. You can do real-life measurements with it. You can actually attach to any data source and measure with it. That's the proof of that it's real-life objects. In this case, they have an execution engine to it. As much that would be the Performance Central. Am I right, Ed? So parts of this, it was so needed in the market. It doesn't matter where we went, customers would be saying, same thing about rules. We also discussed that already. Do you have a rule that applies to saying this rule must apply to that entire flow? Yes. Nobody had that thought, besides the fact that IBM's rule engine needs that specification. Microsoft's, SAP's, Oracle's, actually all rule engines need this specification. But no process tool could specify that on the process. It's like the entire industry agrees on it, on rules that you needed, but the place where you actually document it had no clue of what it was or how it's done. Actually creating one of the biggest silos, and we were not, I mean, in the leading practice community, our mission is not to develop software. As a matter of fact, it's a pain in the, for us to sit and develop with vendors. I mean, it's hours, weeks, months of pain. Some of the things, like you said, you guys said, oh, finally it has services in, and Ed said, you have to thank Mark, he didn't give up on that subject. There was multiple calls where we said, well, if you do that, there is no such thing of going close with that. It must have that semantic relationship. If not, I'm sorry, we don't go and compromise with it. So I can say and vouch for the objects in the business layers, those that you saw, those are in the layers. We are working, and which Ed then also say it's an evolving aspects. We are working of aspects of saying, since I can decompose all those business aspects, shouldn't it be able that I specify the risks to rules, to security, to all the other aspects we have, to the business model, to the policies, etc. This is an evolving aspect. I mean, it takes a lot of time from us and a lot of time from iGrafx or the other vendors we work with. But in any way, I had to add parts of this. This is one of the reasons we feel it is very nice to have a tool that enables this for many of those customers we work with. And last but not least, last point, the same we talked about the processes. This also works. It's one of the few tools, including with Mega and others, that also connects to SAP for execution. And you asked for, is possible parts of this for execution. It does connect where you can upload this for Solution Manager. We didn't have time to go through it. It's due to the fact, I mean, some of the sessions, and I realize some of you said, well, why didn't you have that session 4 hours? I mean, that's a challenge about such a community. Some of them wanted one session 4 hours, the others 3 hours, the others only 1 hour, and one they said, I visited that session. That was like, that's the nature of such a community, but I hope it gave you a little bit of the feeling. Anyway, that is it for this. I think I'm giving over.
That's it.
Justin, thank you very much.
Thank you. Very briefly, don't go too far, Mark. We thought that for those of you who might be new to the community, you might be interested in a very short video about the history of where this whole thing started. So that's what we've prepared for you. It's narrated by a guy named Derek Sievers at a recent TED Talk. Make sure we have volume.
Ladies and gentlemen, at TED we talk a lot about leadership and how to make a movement. So let's watch a movement happen, start to finish, in under 3 minutes, and dissect some lessons from it. First, of course, you know, a leader needs the guts to stand out and be ridiculed. But what he's doing is so easy to follow. So here's his first follower with a crucial role. He's going to show everyone else how to follow. Now notice that the leader embraces him as an equal. So now it's not about the leader anymore. It's about them, plural. His friends. Now if you notice that the first follower is actually an underestimated form of leadership in itself. It takes guts to stand out like that. The first follower is what transforms a lone nut into a leader. And here comes the second follower. Now it's not a lone nut, it's not 2 nuts, 3 is a crowd, and the crowd is news. So a movement must be public. It's important to show not just the leader, but the followers, because you find that new followers emulate the followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, and immediately after, 3 more people. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point. Now we've got a movement. So, notice that as more people join in, it's less risky. So those that were sitting on the fence before now have no reason not to. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, but they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. So, over the next minute, you'll see all of those that prefer to stick with the crowd, because eventually they would be ridiculed for not joining in. And that's how you make a movement. But let's recap some lessons from this. So, first, if you are the type, like the shirtless dancing guy, that is standing alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals. So it's clearly about the movement, not you. Okay, but we might have missed the real lesson here. The biggest lesson, if you noticed, did you catch it? Is that leadership is over-glorified. That yes, it was the shirtless guy who was first, and he'll get all the credit, but it was really the first follower that transformed the lone nut into a leader. So as we're told that we should all be leaders, that would be really ineffective. If you really care about starting a movement, have the courage to follow and show others how to follow. And when you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first one to stand up and join in. And what a perfect place to do that, TED. Thanks.
So to the lone nut, and Henrik, thank you for following him and making us comfortable doing the same.
To make sure that we're not forgetting, I did not know this video. This is very nice. Funny. Where do we have Bas and Henk? Where are they hiding? Could you stand up? These were the nerds that set up the crowd. I was driving, this is many, many, many years ago. We already had SAP were already training the stuff. This was already going out, so lots of companies were following it. But we did not have a community. Now I was driving every day with ink, and he managed to drive, now, well, I don't want to say 35 kilometers, but about 70, 80 kilometers on a European highway. So, and I kept on needing to say him the speed is 100. But anyway, he was telling his idea, we need to do a community. Now the good thing, the training took back then, the lead training, how many months did it take, Hank? 7 months of training. That's, well, the SAP training hasn't changed, it's still 7 months. Ours has become a week. But it took...
It's non-profit.
It's a non-profit while a business model of profit. Anyway, it took him 7 months to convince me. But by the way, it is actually these two guys to thank. They were actually the first ones to have the idea, let's do a community. Most of those that are in the community or the older parts already know it. But in the meantime, they still on the board, but not as much the front dancers. The rest of the crowd you see outside. So I just had the feeling that needs to be mentioned, that you know who were the first two that actually followed. Okay. Thank you, Michael. I actually want to conclude as you've been here for 2 days now, so you know a lot about the reference content, you know a lot about reading practice, what we can do, and so on. Like the video shows, this is not about Mark or me. This is all about you and how you are able to leverage the reference content where you are within your organization. If you're a consulting company, approach me, then we can talk about it. If you're an ISV, approach me, then we can talk about it. And you also have seen a lot of our weaknesses. We are very, very detailed. We're going all down to the basement. We have a Global University Alliance. We have the very, very heavy guys. The reason why we've gone all down to the basement is because that's where we have done the connections. We do need one to have a better communication up front, that you can leverage it at all levels that you are. And we're getting at that level step by step. We need each of you that applies the reference content are more than willing to participate actively. We have some of our community members, they participate very actively. Some of them are very engaged in the company, so they don't have time. So it's a little bit on and off. If you are interested, approach me. There's enough to lift. If you're an organization that really says, you know what, we like this open source community sharing, we know it's a challenging business model, we're willing to support it in terms of building a repository on this and this and this. There are some things, Mark and myself are driven by passion to really drive this forward, and there are some things that are extremely challenging for us to get to next step. We want to share all that content with you, but we need a strong repository. That's a basic things. We have evaluated a lot of these things into it, and we need strong practitioners in all different areas. If you have some good ideas in terms of content, we are more than willing to take it in. It takes our value audits, it's very long. It takes around 8 to 16 months to value audit it, because all content has to go through slices and dices from left and right. As you see, everything within our content fits 110% together. And that's the secret sauce that you can leverage. You don't necessarily have to know everything about it. You have seen a little bit in the stomach. You take it where you need it. If you, Thomas, need the supply chain management, then you take it at this level. If you need support to implement the reference content, that's where you should approach me, and I will reference you to the different partners that we have. We have very tight collaboration with our partners to make sure that they do it correctly. And there's two elements that are important for us. We want to keep the reference content free, and the other element is that with the reference content, we actually believe that we change the way that consultancy is being done very, very differently. The transformation and enablement within organizations has to happen within organizations. They need coaching, they need support, but the biggest part has to happen within an organization itself. That's it.
Thank you for today.